as I've mentioned, we have 70 plus musicians who are about to grace our stage tonight. And yes. And because we have so many with us, I want to make a special thanks on behalf of our executive director and CEO and our dedicated and remarkable board. I want to thank our staff. Thank you, staff. Thank you, the team, Wallace team, for making all of this happen in one afternoon. And what an exciting rehearsal it was. So excited. And thank you, Josh, and your entire team.
Of course. Thank you, Coy. I'm Josh Welsh, president of Film Independent, and I just want to say thank you. Give it up for Film Independent. We love doing events here at the Wallace. This is our home away from home. We do really special programming here. We do live reads of classic screenplays. We do evenings with extended conversations with notable talent. And of course, Bring the Noise, which is, if you haven't been to a Bring the Noise before, it's a mix of film, conversation, and live music, and it can take many different forms. And tonight we have an incredibly special evening. I'm so excited for this. We've never done anything remotely like this. We're so honored to have Mary McCartney here talking about her beautiful new film, If These Walls Could Sing. She will be in conversation with Morgan Neville, a longtime friend of Film Independent and a great filmmaker. And then, of course, conductor Mark Graham is going to lead a 72-person orchestra in music that was recorded at Abbey Road. So, very special night. I want to just a couple thank yous. I want to thank the HFPA for being a presenting sponsor of Film Independent Presents. Thank you so much. Yes, give it up. And I want to give a shout out to Sandra Cuneo, who I know is here tonight. Sandra, you are an angel. I also want to thank Disney Original Documentaries for making this possible. And I want to thank the Film Independent staff. We could not do this without a lot of support and creativity. And I want to thank the programming and events team at Film Independent, led by the one and only Rachel Bleemer. Yes! So with that, it is my great honor to introduce a filmmaker I've already mentioned him by name, but he's the director of 20 Feet from Stardom, Best of Enemies, Yo-Yo Ma and the Silk Road Ensemble, so many beautiful films. Please welcome the one and only Morgan Neville.
My first memories of Abbey Road, we lived nearby, and it's literally just going round and visiting my mum and dad when they were recording. And my first memories are of the reception area that used to just have all of these colour pictures of all the different bands that had been there. Particularly one of Kate Bush was really striking. So, they were very early memories. And then, like at the beginning of the documentary, it only went on at the very end. We kind of introduced it by saying, my history goes way back. So when I was asked to direct the documentary, I contacted the woman who runs my mum's photo archive and said, do you have any pictures of me at Abbey Road? And she immediately texted me back like this baby picture of like 3 months old in the corner. So it's kind of crazy. So
you were destined to make this film.
Yeah, and the thing is, it was brilliant because apart from that, I didn't. And then when I was older and I was working, I used to go to Abbey Road for work, and I became friends with Ken Townsend, the manager, and the people that actually work there. So that's where I really had my affection for the people, the staff, so I had those two elements, but I didn't know anything about the history of it. All of that was learned in making the documentary.
And it's all in the film. So why don't we watch our first clip, and then we'll talk some more. That is such a great story.
Well, we were so lucky to find that interview with Shirley Bassey. That scene, that was such a sort of famous story within Abbey Road that people would tell me about, but we had absolutely nothing to illustrate it, which is with a lot of the stories you understand as a documentary filmmaker. It's like, how do you illustrate a story? If you can't, then it can't go into the documentary.
Well, it's, one of the challenges of making a film about recording, and I've done it too, which is, most of this happens in rooms with no cameras, often in the middle of the night. And how do you make this come alive? And you do so many interesting things visually and otherwise, an incredible archive. But how did you face the challenge of trying to put us into scenes like this so we actually feel like we're there?
The interviews, we relied heavily on the interviews because, for instance, we knew the thing that we really had that was great was all of the recording session sheets. And there was a Naomi who had gone through all of them, so she brought it to us and said, look, Jimmy Page, you can see that he was actually a session musician on Goldfinger, and then he agreed to be interviewed. Bless you, whoever sneezed there. But he agreed to be interviewed, but then, as you'll know, like I interviewed several people and I sort of asked them something thinking they're going to tell me about this and that will help me. And a lot of the times people are like, oh, I can't really remember it, or it wasn't the story that you have been told over the years. That happened a few times with other stories I'd heard about. So I was like really hoping that Jimmy Page remembered it well and that it was what it had become as the folklore. So he was brilliant, and so because he was told that story so well, and then I found my archivist found that one really great interview with Shirley Bassey. I mean, it's just those two stories, and then some filming in the studio. That's it.
I mean, I love that that you have Jimmy Page telling that story, talking about being a session musician. You also have Elton John in the film talking about being a session musician at Abbey Road. I mean, it's just such a great way of seeing these musicians differently, but also now hearing these songs differently. Like, I don't think I'm going to listen to these songs the same way ever again.
Yeah, I think also what's good, because you and I were sort of touching on it before we came on stage, what's interesting is I didn't really know a lot of it before I started researching it, and I didn't realize that the recording system in the beginning was 3-hour sessions. The band had to arrive rehearsed and ready. The producer told them what to do, and then it was done. So that was how most everybody started in the early 60s. So Elton John, as Reginald White, will have been like this jobbing session musician. And then it sort of grew and grew and grew. So when I interviewed him, it was like having him back being a kid. Like you could see, I think you can see in the interview, he goes back, you can sort of see the way he's sitting, and being in Abbey Road doing the interview, it feels like it really took him back. So it feels much more emotional, I think, as an interview.
I mean, I'm sure that was an experience you had again and again, because it seems like you interviewed almost everybody in the studio, or many of the people in the studio. Just that experience of them being back. I mean, you see people in the film reacting to being back there, and it's part of what people react to when they make music there. The kind of what the space conjures in you, you know, the ghosts, whatever you want to talk about that space has. And it's both something that is powerful, but it's also difficult to describe, and you as a documentary filmmaker in this case have to kind of try and explain what it is about this building that has this power. And so how did you approach a problem like that?
It felt like, first of all, I just said yes to do, you know, at first I toyed with whether I should take on the documentary, and then once I committed to it, I kind of committed to it without a very clear plan. It was sort of like a lot of the things I do, I say yes and then close my eyes and just jump in. So I signed up for the job and then spent a lot of time researching and sort of sitting, writing out exactly what happened when it opened, what it, you know, going through what the building was before, looking at the plans, looking at everybody that had recorded there. And from there it grew. And the main thing that concerned me at the beginning was I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do justice to bringing the emotion of going into the studio. So a lot of the facts I was learning were really interesting facts. But I was like, this is like, oh, that's interesting. But actually, I wanted people to feel that emotion. And the other thing is, I've grown up watching, you know, at the beginning of the documentary, I start on the zebra crossing because there's always people there. And it means so much to them. That's kind of who I was making it for, in a way. It's sort of bringing you inside the studio.
Yeah, well, and of course, I mean, there's a lot of emotion in the film, and a lot of it comes from the music too. I mean, that's what music does. That's the gift as being documentary filmmakers that work with music. You know,
you, as you pointed out, the interviews, like, luckily, because I didn't have nobody had agreed to, so I could have signed up and then everyone's like, oh, thanks, nice idea, but no. But luckily, I think because everyone has such fond feelings and emotion for Abbey Road, pretty much everybody agreed. Some people took a bit more persuading than others, but
Who needed more persuading?
Roger Waters gave me the runaround for a long time.
No, I mean, I was looking, okay, just for those of you who haven't seen it, because it's an amazing lineup of people in the film. I mean, John Williams, Elton John, Ringo, your father, Jimmy Page, Dave Gilmour, Roger Waters, not together. Liam and Noel Gallagher, not together. Nick Mason, Cliff Richards, George Lucas, Nile Rodgers. I mean, it goes on and on. You know, it's a wealth of amazing figures, but that speaks to what the space is too. You know, and what also struck me is, unlike other documentaries or stories about other studios, you know, we were talking about Muscle Shoals or Sound City or these other places where people gather to make music. I was thinking about it. I mean, Abbey Road, or EMI Studios, as it was first known, was a purpose-built studio, the first in the world, right, in 1931, I think I learned in the film. But it's the only studio I could think of that really did all kinds of music. So lots of classical, lots of orchestral. I mean, some of my favorite footage in the film is Jacqueline Dupree, who's just an incredible footage of her playing cello. So you not only have to balance time and stories, but you have to balance genres and tone and pace and all these things. So how was that challenge for you?
I think at first I had a huge list of people and songs that I wanted to put in, and then I realized that it would just be too much and too eclectic. And again, to bring in the emotion, it's sort of like you need fewer people telling more of the story. And as I spent a good amount of time researching at the beginning, which sort of was very helpful, because it sort of was like classical, how are we going to do this, all these different sections. And I kind of wanted it chronologically sort of planned out, but also it dips around into different themes. But then there were these sort of serendipitous moments where we were like, right, Edward Elgar opened the studio in 1931, and then it was like, okay. Then I realized I found out Jacqueline Dupre had recorded the Elgar Concerto there, and she's like, I'd always loved her as a musician, as an artist. And her story is very emotional as well, and very, and so we found great interviews with her. And then I found out that Sheku, who's my modern interview, had also performed, he'd recorded Edward Elgar's cello concerto there, and he was basically influenced by Jacqueline Dupre to become a cellist. And he has a very similar way in which he plays that really kind of gets you right there. So, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's the first documentary I've made, but it's sort of like you kind of hope for the best, and then when you get those things, you're like, okay, it's coming together.
Those are very good days. So another thing I didn't really realize is what Dire Straits, the studio, was in the late 70s financially, because bands like Dire Straits weren't playing there and recording there. Sorry. So what saved the studio? Hollywood, right?
Yeah. So Ken Townsend was the manager who's like, Ken Townsend is kind of Abbey Road, because before he became manager, it was very kind of authoritarian, and, he made it, he told me, he was like, he likes cricket, and so he wanted it to be like a team. So he sort of delegated people to have control in different departments, and really transformed the way it's run, and it has that same kind of system now that he put into place. So he found out, basically Studio One is the huge orchestral studio, and it's really big, and it wasn't really being booked because pretty much all of the classical recordings had been done, and then they've been done again for CD, and it just really was laying empty a lot of the time. And he had his ear to the ground and found out that the recording studio outside London had lost its lease. So he got in touch with the producer that was doing the film scores and said, let's do a deal.
I think we're going to see a film clip that tells part of the story, so let's run the next clip.
Tell it much better than I would.
No. it feels like you have some thought after watching that clip.
It was just how excited I was after the John Williams interview, because if he hadn't been so eloquent about talking about the space, I probably would have needed to do several other interviews. But literally, we did that one interview, and it was like, between him and George Lucas, it was sort of like we were done, which was great, because it sort of, again, it sort of just makes the sections neater. But also, that was when the premiere for the documentary was at Abbey Road. They did for the first time a premiere at Abbey Road, so they put in like speakers and a sound system and the screen, and we sat on the orchestral chairs. But that was so exciting watching that bit when he's sort of the film of John Williams conducting in Studio One, and we were sitting in Studio One watching it. Was pretty, pinch yourself moment.
Yeah, that's pretty special.
Yeah.
So a story like this, obviously the story of the studio continues. So how do you think about ending a film like this? Because the film has a very powerful ending, but how did you craft that? What went into it?
Yeah, that's the thing. Early on, I was sort of thinking about how to end it, because I wanted it to have a really strong ending and for you to have that real feeling at the end, like sort of that, when you walk out of somewhere and you're like, I want to do something, So I found a recording of Celeste singing Hear My Voice, and I've worked with her a couple of times before taking her portraits, because really this is the first documentary I've directed, so I really used a lot of my techniques in portrait photography, sort of came into play a lot with the interviews. But I found that really strong piece of her singing Hear My Voice in Abbey Road Studio 2, and I interviewed her as well. And then we kind of sum up with some very strong sort of one-liners from people. So you sort of finish feeling really in love with Abbey Road.
I want to ask you, because you just alluded to it, as a photographer and somebody who's done a lot of portraiture, how did that play into how you both made the film, shot the film, and did the interviews? Because I'm always interested in what people bring in their own experience to their filmmaking.
I think what the biggest help was being prepared and sort of knowing that the way that I like to do portraits is to create an area that I know someone's going to feel comfortable in, so that when they come in, they're not like, oh, why, they're not sort of distracted by something. So I think that was the most helpful thing from having all that experience. I kind of had it all set up. I was really well researched, well prepared. But then a lot of it, then you're sort of nicely lit, comfortable, but then the rest is down to the kind of chemistry of how you get along and how that conversation, that's the exciting bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, part of this is part of your father's story too. How did you think about crafting that part of the story? How much did you ask for his input, or did you not ask for his input in terms of thinking about what parts of that history you wanted to tell?
He was helpful with giving me little nuggets of information. Like when I told him I was directing the documentary, he would sort of say things like, how things, he was telling me about how the Mrs. Mills piano would just be in the corner. And, Abbey Road today, still there are like tape machines in the hallway, Mrs. Mills piano, which was on Lady Madonna. In a way, I was even thinking, is that why the Beatles ended up using so many orchestral pieces on their recordings? Probably because of Studio One and seeing, symphonic pianos. So, he helped piece it all together.
Just something else I want to comment on is, maybe it's in part because you're a photographer, but visually you managed to make it both beautiful but also kind of come alive in a way. And I'm just wondering, I think I love the graphics in the film too, but I'm sure a lot of thought went into all of that in terms of how to craft the film.
I just wanted it to be really visually interesting to the viewer. So I was like, look, we'll do an interview, but let's not just have talking head interviews. It was sort of like, originally I wouldn't have wanted any talking head interviews. It would have been all footage, but there just wasn't that much footage. But then I filmed it I'm a bit jet lagged, but I'm forgetting what's the...
Anamorphic?
And with anamorphic lenses, so it sort of has this letterbox technique. So then I was really excited. We kind of used the stock footage with like 3 screens. But then I did get a phone call from my producer just telling me I was burning all the money and the budget on the clearance form. So he was like, stop doing that. Because it's the first time I'd done it, so I was blissfully unaware. But so, I have film, the interviews. It's sort of about creating layers and textures and photographs. So I just want it to be something that sort of really gets the viewer interested.
So are you going to make another documentary?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
If I
You
can
enjoyed the
think of
experience
something.
enough? And
I did, because it was the team that I had were really great to work with, and we all worked really hard, but we all got on really well. And it's quite a small team, but we were on the whole project the whole time together. So, and I had my editor was a drama editor, so I think that really helped. So he and I kind of could debate on, we didn't have, it's not like a typical music documentary edit, which is something I was really wanting to avoid.
yeah, there's some great editing in the film.
He's a brilliant editor.
I think it's about time for the other event tonight, which, an incredible treat that we are going to have a chance to listen to some of the music, some of the scores, some of the songs made famous and recorded at Abbey Road. And we have some people here to make it all come true. So
Amazing.
why don't we
Thank
you
you.
so
Thank
much,
you.
Mary, for doing this.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, take another bow. No encores. No encores prepared. That's it from us. It's been a pleasure to play this stuff for you tonight. Congratulations on the success of such a great film. Thanks for coming. See you next time. Thank you. Good night.